Hey, so welcome to episode 2 of the build of the 626. It's currently about 8 o'clock at night. It's about 3 degrees in the shed, a bit cold in the last few days, but she's all good. Haven't touched it since the last video, been busy with some other stuff, but yeah, crack into it, eh? I really still should have cleaned out some stuff or removed some stuff, but that's all things I can leave till late at night jobs, and I don't want to make too much noise or anything. So I've just dug all the Nissan suspension out of the back shed that I have been accumulating. Turns out I don't have everything I thought I did, but got most things there to sort of mock it all up. Dug coilovers out from where they were hiding and whatnot, so yeah, do some test fits, eh? These are the coilovers that I've got for the project. XYZ FCRX7 numbers, fronts and rears. Bought off a good mate Richard for a deal. He'd bought them for a project of his and ended up not needing them, so yeah, he passed them on to me for a good price, which was good of him, good bastard. So what I've done with these fronts here is these bottom mounts. These are actually the original bottom mounts, if this thing focuses. These are original bottom mounts for the RX-7. You'll notice, if I can get to sit there, the bolt pattern is different obviously between the RX-7 and the Nissan hubs. So I bought these bottom mounts off the guys at Speed Factor, and they screw onto these coilovers so I can run the Nissan bottom hub and the RX-7  4-bolt top hat, which I just had a quick look, it is very near fitting, maybe just a slight drill out and they'll bolt up. All the strut top needed was holes drilled out a little bit. They were 8mm studs originally with a 10mm hole, and these are 10mm studs, so I've just drilled them out to 12. They're a little offset, but they're through and they'll do it fine, so it's a pretty nice fit really. So here's the two cross members, 626 one and our Nissan Silvia crossmember. As you can see, our height between bottom of crossmember and top of it, where it mounts to the chassis rails, is pretty similar really. So what that would mean is if we were to mount the Silvia one up under the car, bottom of the crossmember would pretty much be the same height as the bottom of the original one. So what I want to do is, because I want to run it so low, I'd like, for two reasons, to bring the Silvia crossmember up into the car a bit further. So one is to get some more ground clearance from the crossmember, and two, which may be a bit more important, is to get the, you can see in the video, the pivot point for the lower arms, raise that up in the car, because essentially by lowering the car a drastic amount, we're going to get our lower arms, instead of in factory position, they would be slightly pointing downhill towards the outer. Once we lower it a shitload, the arm's going to be pointing upwards. So by bringing the crossmember up into the car and the hub still at the same height, we should be able to get our arms back level, or ideally pointing back downhill, but the height it's going to be, that's probably going to be pretty unachievable. To get the Silvia crossmember fitting in the 626, ideally what we need to do is replicate these chassis rail mounts, replicate them onto this. So obviously these holes are a lot closer together than the holes in the Nissan, so what I'll most likely do is cut the entire engine mount area off the Silvia crossmember, because we're not going to be needing that, and remove this as well, the the chassis rail mounts, make something new that replicates that distance there, and I'll bring it down further, so essentially it lifts the crossmember up into the car, and hopefully gain a bit of suspension geometry back, get the roll centre back in check. Also as well, on our Silvia crossmember, obviously we've got our steering rack mounts, which, because with the car I intend to pretty much do everything, cruising, grip racing, drifting, I'll most likely set the steering up for a bit of a drift setup, and so what that'll entail is me cutting these steering rack mounts off and bringing them forward, which is a common mod to do with all drift setups, but commonly in Silvia stuff. An area I think is critical in getting these S chassis front suspension setups to work in an old car, and an area that I think a lot of people maybe overlook when they do it, is caster angle. A lot of old Toyotas, and these Mazdas are quite similar, have very little caster angle, so the strut is very up and down. In Silvia's, Spheras, whatnot, the strut angle is leans back quite a way, giving it quite a lot of caster angle. So that's something I want to achieve in this, just to replicate the setup in a Nissan as close as possible. There's two ways I could do it. Obviously you could move the strut top back in the car, but that's a major, either by moving the strut tower, or obviously making the holes at the top big enough that the strut top could physically move back. The easier option, because we are putting the crossmember into the car, the easiest option is leave the strut top where it is and the crossmember moves forward. So by doing that, essentially gives us the same result as if the struts were leaned back, giving it that caster angle that the Silvias have from factory. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to aim to achieve, is getting that angle the same really as per Silvia factory specs, and then can fine tune from there. Well, I've chopped off the original SR engine mount and chassis rail mounts, cut them both off, so we're left with the bare crossmember. I've set it up under there and had a look and had a bit of a measure. Going off a quick measure, sitting up there, I can cut 35mm out of the height, so lifting at 35mm. So we're going to chop the top off to remake the plates to bolt to the new chassis rails, and I'm going to chop the ends off it, not affecting the wire control arm mounts obviously, but just the ends, so that it fits up snugly to the chassis rails in the 626. Got all the suspension roughly sitting in place, just sitting on the jacked up against the chassis rails. Coilovers are in, hubs are in, arms, or lower arms. So if you can see there's the original 2 bolts that come through the chassis rails to hold the crossmember. I've had to cut the forward bolt off, as it came right through where the crossmember would have gone. So I've cut that off, and we'll have to drill through the chassis rails and weld in a new crush tube for a bolt further forward. As I mentioned before, getting the crossmember in the right position forward and back pretty much comes down to getting the caster angle or the strut angle correct, in my opinion. The angle there of the strut. I've got these wheels mocked up, which I've actually had for a while. These are the same slicks that I'm going to run, but these are only a 13 by 8.5 steel. So I do plan on running a wider steel than that, but the same size tyre, so this is a good enough test fit for now. So what I've realised just by mocking it up is that with right on the verge of the minimum caster I'd like to run, it starts to foul. Might not show it here, but the wheel starts to foul against the firewall. It's actually just missing now, which we could, I could modify the firewall, cut that away to get clearance, which I'd rather not do. So, and it also well hits that, which I am prepared to cut that. That's no worries. So what I'm actually going to do is be giving the car more caster than the factory Silvia would have had, but still the sort of caster angles that are common to run in forms of motorsport with Silvias. So two things for me to worry about is the wheel hitting there, get that clear, and getting the caster angle right. The other thing that's become apparent since I put the crossmember in place is engine position. I did mention that I would potentially like to run it behind the crossmember if I could. That is well out of the picture. There's only maybe 250 mil between the back of where the steering rack will be and the firewall, so to put the motor behind there is not going to happen without the intake coming up through the cowl somewhere there, so that's not at all what I want to do. And I may run into problems actually getting the motor in a good position. Raise the crossmember obviously, like I said, which is also going to mean the motor has to come up that amount. And common problems with putting rotaries and stuff is essentially because the crank is in the middle of the motor rather than the bottom like in a conventional piston motor. The whole motor really wants to be lower to get the drivetrain angles correct, but going against everything that I'm just trying to do. So either the motor might have to be mounted quite high, which is going to mean cutting the tunnel from the firewall right to the back of the car to get the drive shaft and gearboxes in the correct angles, or may be able to keep the engine at a reasonably low height and have to make a custom sump to get around the crossmember and where the rack will be. Looking at it, the crossmember is right in the critical parts of the motor where the pickup is, but just going to have to see really. Maybe get a little bit creative, but it'll be what it is. Made these plates up here, which will be going on top of the crossmember up under the chassis rails there, with the holes obviously correct. I've temporarily drilled, did you see that hole there? There's the new hole where the crossmember bolts will go through. For now I'm just going to slip a bolt through there, but for a permanent fixture I'll need to drill it bigger and weld a crush tube through that rail there. You can't just have a bolt, as when you do it up you end up crushing it down, so it needs something solid to pull up against. So yeah, once we come back around to it, I'll weld a crush tube in there. Little tip that I like to do with plates, or when you're doing this sort of work, the holes I've drilled bang on 10 mil, which is the same size as the bolts. The reason I do that is because I need to slip these up under there and then weld this crossmember to it. I want these to be accurate, so by doing the same size hole it means it's a really snug fit and it'll align it as the bolts are. So what I'll do is like that, drill them to the same size, slip them up, tack the crossmember in, and then once I remove the crossmember and weld it fully, I'll then drill these holes out to a bigger size, because if they are the same size as the bolt, you'll pretty much never get the crossmember off or back on again. So by drilling bigger it'll make it easy to fit and remove. But if I had drilled them to say an 11mm hole now, when I slip them up under there and weld it in place, these could well be cocked that way or folded back with the stop and the bolt holes. So then when I weld it in, it will already be cocked over, which you don't want. So by drilling them that same size, that eliminates that problem. Cross member is back bolted in. So I haven't done anything with caster arms yet, but what I've realised since I pulled the car apart, the front radiator panel there is pretty crusty, a bit bent up and rusty, so we'll actually revisit the caster arms and the caster arm brackets. I'll wait till the motor's in place and we can decide on a radiator, hopefully a nice big radiator, yeah, as big as we can get between the rails, and I might probably actually end up chopping the whole front of that out there and making new radiator supports, and then I can make caster arm brackets from that. I'm not normally a huge fan of chopping away metal if we don't have to. I like to retain a bit of factory to cars, but it really isn't worth rebuilding the factory bit there. We'll just make what we need to suit clear radiator, oil cooler, etc., and then yeah, caster arm brackets. And we're also going to need to cut away these inner tubs too, with the amount this wheel hits it. So there'll be a bit to do in the front, but we'll come back to that once we've done a bit more to the rest of the car. Next step will be get the steering column in, the Nissan steering column. See if we've got to lengthen or shorten the column, or by fluke it might be the right length. Once that's in, then bolt the motor and gearbox together, sit it in place. Highly likely we're going to have to chop that sucker out. That's all good, do what we've got to do. Once the steering column's in place, good step after that, which a step that I really enjoy, is getting the seat mounted. I love a good setting position, and I scored this awesome old Autosport in sort of a corduroy burgundy. I love these old Autosports, they're nice and comfy, nice and sturdy, so I'll get that in there. And nothing beats sitting in the car that doesn't go making noises. If anyone knows of another one of these seats around that would be for sale, I'd love to buy one. I've got another Autosport that I can possibly get retrimmed to suit, but I feel it'll look a bit oddball next to an old one, and I like to keep sort of some original upholstery on them. So yeah, if anyone knows of one, get at me. Thanks for watching. I'm going to try and do one of these videos sort of every week or so. The first lot of building it will probably go quite quick as things happen, but later on it might get a bit slower. So yeah, hope you enjoy it. Cheers.